Look through the metallic eye of the future and see a world where every choice has a cinematic consequence. We explore the intersection of human destiny and the cold precision of fate in every frame. Hit subscribe now and change the way you see the world.
My sister's wedding reception was still going when I slipped away to the coat check and texted our family attorney, not to congratulate her, to report what I had just watched her do to our father's will. But let me back up, because none of this will make sense without the part that came before it, the part that took me 3 years to fully understand. My name is Claire, and I am 31 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. I find money that people try to hide. I trace paper trails through shell companies and offshore accounts and falsified ledgers. I am, professionally speaking, very good at spotting when numbers have been rearranged to tell a story they were never supposed to tell. I say all of this because my family spent a long time counting on the fact that I would never turn those skills on them. They were wrong. My father built Hartwell Cabinetry from nothing. He started the company in our garage when I was 4 years old, with secondhand tools and a used truck, and a client list that was basically just our neighbors and 2 local contractors who felt sorry for him. By the time I was in high school, he had 14 employees and a reputation across 3 counties. By the time I graduated college, Hartwell Cabinetry had a commercial wing, a showroom, and contracts with 2 hotel developers. My father was not a rich man by any broad definition, but he had built something real, something that worked, something he was proud of. My older brother, Derek, had worked at the company since he was 17. He never went to college. He learned the trade from my father, side by side. And there was a period in my early 20s when I genuinely believed that was a beautiful thing. A father and son running something together. A legacy being passed down through hands and hours. I was naive. Derek married a woman named Patrice 6 years ago. Patrice is the kind of person who does not walk into a room so much as she auditions for it. She is charming when she needs something and cold when she doesn't. And she has a specific talent for making you feel like you've disappointed her even when you've done nothing wrong. My father adored her. My mother, who passed away when I was 22, never trusted her. I used to think my mother was just being protective of her son. I don't think that anymore. For the first 2 years after their wedding, I was mostly just busy with my own life. I had moved to Columbus for work. I visited home for holidays and called my father on Sundays and thought, from a comfortable distance, that everything was basically fine. Derek ran the day-to-day operations of the company. My father still came in 3 or 4 days a week. It seemed like a natural transition, the kind of generational handoff that was supposed to happen. Then my father called me on a Tuesday in March, which he never did, and asked me if I could look over some paperwork for him. He was embarrassed when he asked. I could hear it in his voice, that careful flatness he used when something was wrong, but he didn't want to make it into something. He said Patrice had been helping with the business finances since Derek's back surgery the previous fall, and he just wanted a second set of eyes. Just to be sure, just because I was good with numbers. I drove home that weekend. What I found in those files took me 11 hours, spread across 2 days, and by the end of it, I had a spreadsheet and a sick, hollow feeling in my chest that I did not know how to name. Patrice had been pulling money from the company's operating account for 14 months, not in large, obvious transfers, in small ones. Vendor payments to companies I could not verify. Reimbursements for expenses with no corresponding receipts. A recurring software subscription for a platform the company did not use. Individually, each line was explainable. Together, they added up to just over $68,000. I sat at my father's kitchen table and I looked at him and I did not know how to say it. He was 70 years old. He had his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a cup of coffee gone cold beside him, and he was looking at me with this expression I had never seen on him before. This open, undefended thing. Like he had already half guessed and was hoping I would tell him he was wrong. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Derek doesn't know." It was not a question. He was telling me, deciding. I asked him what he wanted to do. He said he needed to think. He asked him what he wanted to do. He said he would handle it. I made the mistake of believing him. 3 months later, my father updated his will. I only found out because his attorney, a man named Gerald, who had handled our family's legal documents for 20 years, called me directly. Gerald was old school and cautious, and something about the new document apparently bothered him enough to reach out. He didn't tell me the specific contents. He just said that my father had come in with Derek and Patrice, and that the meeting had not seemed entirely comfortable, and that he thought I should visit home soon. I drove back the following weekend. My father seemed smaller than I remembered. He had lost weight. He told me his back had been bothering him, and he hadn't been sleeping well. He made dinner, and we watched television, and he asked about my job, and it was all perfectly normal. And when I brought up the finances, he changed the subject so smoothly I almost let him. I didn't let him. He admitted that he had spoken to Derek about what I'd found. He said Derek had been devastated, shocked, had sworn he had no idea what Patrice had been doing. He said Patrice had cried and apologized and promised to pay it back, and that Derek had agreed to take a smaller salary for 2 years to make it right. My father said he had decided to keep it in the family, not involve lawyers, not involve police. He said he didn't want to destroy his son's marriage over a mistake. I asked him about the will. He looked out the window for a moment. Then he told me he had adjusted some things, made Derek the primary beneficiary for the business with provisions for me and other assets. He said it made sense because Derek was the one running things. I said, Dad, she stole $68,000 and there were no consequences. He said, she's family. I drove back to Columbus that Sunday evening and I cried for most of the highway. Not because of the money, not even entirely because of the will, but because I could see what was happening and I could not find the door to stop it. Over the next 18 months, I watched my father decline. His back got worse. He had a minor stroke in November that left him with some difficulty with words, nothing catastrophic but enough to slow him down, enough to make him more dependent. He stopped coming into the business. Derek and Patrice moved into the house to help care for him, which my father seemed genuinely grateful for, and which I found difficult to feel good about, though I told myself I was being uncharitable. I visited every 6 weeks or so, sometimes more. Each time, something felt slightly different. The way Patrice spoke to my father's doctors on his behalf. The way Derek handled phone calls in the other room. The way certain topics, the business, the finances, the will, seemed to have become quietly off limits. I started keeping notes. It began almost as a habit, something I did without fully deciding to. Dates of visits, things I observed, things my father said and then, on a later visit, contradicted or seemed not to remember saying. I noted the name of his new estate attorney, a man I did not recognize, who had replaced Gerald. I noted that when I asked my father about the change, he said Derek had recommended someone who specialized in business succession. I noted that the new attorney's office was in the same building as a development company that had recently made an offer on Hartwell Cabinetry's commercial property. I ran that thread for 6 weeks before I had enough to understand what I was looking at. The development company was not independently owned. It was structured through 2 LLCs, and one of those LLCs had a registered agent whose name I recognized from Patrice's family. A cousin, someone she had mentioned once at a holiday dinner years ago. Casually, the way you mention someone you assume will never matter. I did not say anything. I kept watching. My father's health stabilized somewhat in the spring. He had a better few months, more like himself, clearer, more present. He called me more often. We had long Sunday conversations again, the way we used to. He told me once, in a careful way, that he felt he had handled some things badly. He didn't elaborate. I didn't push. I just told him I loved him and that I was paying attention. He passed away in September, 9 months after the minor stroke, from a second and larger one. I flew home the morning after the hospital called. Derek met me at the door of our childhood home, looking hollowed out and red-eyed, which surprised me. I had started thinking of him as someone who had chosen a side. But grief doesn't follow the lines you draw in your head. We hugged in the doorway for a long moment, and neither of us said anything. Patrice was in the kitchen making coffee. She looked up when I came in and said she was so sorry and offered me a cup, and I took it. And I sat at the table where I had once found $68,000 in a spreadsheet, and I drank the coffee and I waited. The attorney meeting was scheduled for 4 days later. I had already spoken to Gerald by then. He had been my father's attorney for longer than the new one, and he retained copies of earlier will drafts as attorneys sometimes do. He had also, as it turned out, kept his own notes from that meeting 2 years earlier, the one he'd called me about. He was willing to share them. Legally, carefully, with appropriate caution, but willing. I had also filed a quiet records request through a contact I had from my professional work, related to the LLC structures I had identified. The documents came back in 48 hours. They were everything I expected, and worse. The morning of the attorney meeting, Patrice was moving through the house in that particular way she had. Purposeful, slightly elevated, like someone who was trying not to visibly enjoy something. She had been making calls for 2 days. She had asked me twice, gently, whether I had thought about my next steps, whether I was planning to go back to Columbus soon, whether I might want to think about the practical realities of the estate. I told her I hadn't decided yet. The four of us, Derek, Patrice, me, and the new attorney, a man named Sullivan, sat around the dining room table I had eaten every holiday meal of my childhood on. Sullivan was professional and smooth and read through the document with practiced neutrality. Under the current will, Derek received the business and the commercial property. I received the house and a modest separate account my father had held in his own name. The business and property combined were worth somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million, depending on the development offer currently on the table. The house was worth $220,000. The account was $43,000. I watched Patrice while Sullivan read. She was very still. The particular stillness of someone who has already done the math. Sullivan finished and asked if there were any questions. I said yes. I had a few. I had brought a folder. I set it on the table. I explained that I was a forensic accountant by profession, and that over the past 2 years, I had been reviewing various financial and legal documents related to my father's estate and the business. I explained that I had identified what appeared to be a pattern of financial misappropriation beginning approximately 3.5 years ago. I explained that I had obtained, through legal channels, documentation related to 2 LLCs connected to the development company that had submitted an offer on the commercial property, and that those LLCs had a registered agent with a documented familial relationship to one person at this table. I explained that I had also obtained Gerald's notes from the will revision meeting 2 years ago, including Gerald's written observation that my father had appeared to sign documents under circumstances that Gerald had found concerning enough to document at the time. I slid the folder to Sullivan. I said that I had already been in contact with an estate litigation attorney, and that I would be requesting a formal review of the will's validity based on documentation of undue influence, in addition to filing a civil claim related to the financial misappropriation. I said I had a scheduled call with the county DA's office the following morning regarding the LLC structures and their relationship to the development offer. I said all of this in the same voice I use in deposition prep. Calm, flat, precise. Derek had gone white. He was staring at the folder like it might do something. Patrice said very quietly, "Claire." I looked at her. She said, "This isn't what it looks like." I said, "I know exactly what it looks like. I've been looking at it for 2 years. Sullivan was very still. He asked carefully whether I was making a formal allegation. I said I was making a formal record and that the formal allegations would follow through appropriate channels, and that everything I had just said was documented and had already been shared with my estate litigation attorney and would be shared with law enforcement as applicable. Derek said, "I didn't know." I looked at my brother. I had thought about this moment. I had thought about it on a lot of dark drives back to Columbus, wondered what I would feel when it arrived. I believed him, actually. That was the complicated part. I believed that Derek had, at some point, made himself not know, had looked away, had accepted explanations he shouldn't have accepted, had let Patrice manage things because it was easier. That's not the same as innocent. But it's not the same as what Patrice had done either. I said, "Then you need to get your own attorney, and you need to do it before noon tomorrow." I stood up and picked up my coffee cup and walked into the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Patrice's voice, low and tight, and then Derek's, and then Sullivan saying something professional and uninflected. I washed my cup in the sink and looked out the window at the backyard, at the apple tree my father had planted the year I was born, which still stood at the edge of the lawn, thick and slightly crooked, doing fine. The estate review took 7 months. My father's original attorney's notes, combined with a medical expert's assessment of his cognitive state at the time of the final will revision, were sufficient to raise serious questions about the circumstances of the signing. The civil case regarding the financial misappropriation was settled before it went to trial, in terms that I am not permitted to discuss in specifics, but that covered the full amount identified, plus legal costs. The development deal on the commercial property fell through when the LLC connections became part of the public record. The property was eventually sold through a legitimate open market process. The proceeds were divided according to an earlier valid will, one Gerald had retained, which reflected my father's actual and documented intentions before the revision. Derek and I don't speak often. We text sometimes. He filed for divorce 8 months after the estate was settled. I don't feel triumphant about that. I mostly feel tired and sad, and occasionally something quieter and harder to name. Some acknowledgement that he lost things too, that he let himself be used, that the damage went in every direction. Patrice sent me an email 14 months after the dining room table meeting. A long one. I read it once and then closed it. I kept my father's house. I'm not living in it yet. I'm still in Columbus, still working, still finding hidden money in other people's ledgers. But I've been out on weekends to sort through things. There's a whole workshop of tools in the garage, organized the way my father organized everything, which was meticulously and with a logic that only fully made sense once you'd watched him work. I've been leaving it the way it is for now. I'm not ready to change it. Last month, I drove out on a Saturday in October and sat on the back porch in the afternoon and looked at the apple tree for a long time. It had a good year. The branches were heavy. There were apples on the ground that nobody had gotten to in time, already going soft. My father used to say that the best thing about building something with your hands was that it was harder to take away. He meant furniture. He meant craftsmanship. He meant the satisfaction of a thing that was real and solid and yours. I think about that a lot now. Some things, it turns out, you have to fight to keep, but they're worth the fight. The ones that are real are always worth the fight. If you're in a situation where something that was meant for you has been quietly rearranged, where someone is counting on the fact that you won't look closely, won't ask questions, won't push back, I want you to know something. Look closely, ask questions, push back, and if you need to bring a folder to a table someday, bring a good one.